It went off. I thought I put it back on.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for attending today's class. I want to make sure that this is interactive. I got a few questions about that, meaning I'm happy to take questions. If you have questions, please put them in the chat bar. That should be the easiest way, although depending on the size of the group, it might be just fine if you unmute yourself and ask the question. So with that said, oh, this is the information. Did we already go by it?
Sorry, got it back.
Oh, I don't know if we need this. We got to work on our timing here. I got to work on mine.
I think
This is the Zoom information, but you can see this. You must have already figured it out. So next slide. This is my contact information. I am also going to post, which I have. Oh boy, I got a lot of choices here. Oh, that's not the chat bar. Sorry. I'm going to post my cell phone in these COVID-19 times. I will say you're free to call my cell phone. However, what I will tell you is that if you are calling between 7:30 and 6 p.m. Monday through Friday, call my office. It is a much better way to get a hold of me. Why? Well, I get a lot of calls, and at my office, I have a full-time receptionist, and she'll be able to take that call. If I'm not busy, I'll take it. If I'm on the phone, she'll be able to take a message. If you want to call back, which I assume that's why you're calling, if I can't talk to you, she'll be able to look at my calendar and say, hey, are you available this afternoon or tomorrow morning or whenever? So it'll be a much more efficient process. My cell phone, I'm happy to get calls on, but I do not monitor it like I do my business phone. So again, I'm not trying to discourage anyone, but best to call if you're calling my cell. I'm sorry, best to use my cell before 7:30 in the morning, after 6 p.m. at night, or on the weekends. Next slide. All right, this is the real estate investing class. And I can't do this, unfortunately, because we're not there face-to-face, but I am curious how many people are active investors? By show of hands. Anybody who's actually investing in real estate already? Yes. I got a yes from Chelsea. Anyone else?
Yes, and I own a property management company.
Well, yes, I did know that.
Yeah. So
I was aware of some people that were already involved. So, all right. Well, the class I wrote, I'm more than happy to receive feedback as to, hey, Rick, it's too simple. Rick, it's not simple enough. Rick, you should have covered this, or you should have gone into more depth about that. I want those comments because that allows me to make the class better. So feel free to provide commentary. If it's suggestions, for instance, like, hey, it's too complicated or it's too basic, please put it in the chat bar, and I'll be happy to receive it so that I can sort of fine tune this going forward. My very first statement that I tell everybody is don't be too pessimistic. I get a lot of people who will call me. They're excited about real estate. They say, well, Rick, I just want to have a general discussion with you. I want to make sure I've got a team of people I can use. So when I do find something, I have an attorney and I'm ready to go, and I have a realtor and a title company and a property management company, etc. And I say, okay, great. And they say, and that doesn't always happen, but I get people say, but I'm really nervous. I don't know if I'm going to be able to find something, and then I don't even know if I find something that I've actually found something I want, because I'm just too concerned. I'm too pessimistic, at least is the way I put it. And if you want to participate in real estate, whether it's as an active investor where you buy something and you own it, or maybe you invest with somebody else who's sort of the lead partner, I don't want to say you just have to dive in, but you kind of have to. I mean, you got to be smart about it. You got to pay attention. You've got to do your due diligence. You should read and try to understand the best you can, but it is impossible to know everything. I've been doing this for 22 years. I don't know everything. It's just not possible. But if you don't participate, you'll never, ever be an investor, and real estate can be a wonderful investment. Next slide. And this kind of goes with the don't be a pessimist. Every time you make a deal, you learn. Now, you don't want to learn negative things, but you're going to. It's inevitable. There is no way, there's no investor I know of that says, oh yeah, that went just as planned. Oh, my estimate on pricing was exactly as anticipated. And that's exactly what happened. Someone's saying I'm not seeing the slide. Anne-Marie?
Correct. I don't know what I'm not doing right.
Try going to like, I'm trying to think of what the names of the different views are. Instead of portrait view, there might be like a speaker view or
I
screen
know.
view.
Yeah. And don't worry about me. Oh, there we go. There we go. It was all the way at the right hand, not in the normal view thing. So for anybody else that had that. Thanks.
There is nobody that I've ever met in my life, which of course includes me, who's ever invested in real estate and hasn't had things go some way other than as planned, where the costs have increased. The anticipated rental rate is not as strong. The general desire from the marketplace, the number of interested parties aren't as many as you thought. It's inevitable. It just happens. And so every time these kinds of things happen, you learn. You can't avoid risk other than to not participate, but that's a risk in and of itself. If you don't invest, whether it's real estate or whatever, then you run the risk of your money not growing. So there's a risk in everything, and it's really about understanding the risk and trying to minimize the risk. So each deal you do, every time you even analyze a deal, you get stronger, your skills get better, your anticipation, your analytical skills, your estimates, your assumptions, everything gets stronger. And as you do it, you'll find better contractors, and you'll be more precise about your end valuations. What is a property realistically worth? It's often said that the time you make money on a real estate deal is on the buy. Now, there's definitely truth to that. I don't know if that's the complete truth, not in my opinion at least, but that's where a lot of the money is made, because if you buy right, that puts you in a position, the best position to actually make money. Next slide. Before you get involved in real estate, you're going to have working capital, whether it be your own money or you're going to have access to working capital. Without capital, I know there are people that go on TV and say you can buy things without any money. And I'm going to say that we're actually going to touch on something. I don't know about my timing, but I think we'll have enough time to go over every slide. There is one way, wholesaling, which I'll talk about. But generally speaking, you can't participate in real estate without money. That's my opinion. It's not realistic. You're going to need some capital. Now, do you need massive amounts of money? No, not at all. But you're going to need some money, and it could be your money, or it could be someone else's money that you have access to. And there are ways we'll talk about money that you say, well, I don't really have any money, but maybe you do. Maybe you have an IRA, for instance. You want to be careful when you're buying a property to not over leverage it, and that's directly related to the amount of capital you have and your risk type. But over leverage meaning where you borrow too much, and there are many people who have lost many properties. And we're talking, when I say properties, we're talking about everything from a modest single family home to big office buildings by over leveraging. And you know, based on COVID-19, people are having challenges right now, landlords, you know, who own apartment buildings and getting their rent. You know, all of a sudden, 50% of your tenants don't pay. You're counting on that. You've leveraged your building. You've borrowed debt in accordance with your ability to cover that debt. You've made assumptions. So there's no way to avoid COVID-19 risks. Who thought that was coming? So I'm not saying someone should have been prepared for COVID-19, but you do need some leeway when you borrow. Don't borrow necessarily the max you can borrow, and really what I mean is make sure you have the ability to pay. You have the ability of what's called service the debt or pay the mortgage payments. Even if it comes out of your own paycheck, you invest on the side and you're a mechanic, you're a teacher. Make sure you've got enough money to supplement in case something doesn't go exactly as planned. And that goes along with making sure you have reserves because unexpected issues always arise. Again, COVID-19, nobody anticipated it. But, you need a new roof, your water heater goes bad, HVAC system, something happens. Tenant doesn't pay rent and vacates, and you can't find the tenant and left the place in shambles. Things happen. These are not uncommon events, and you want to make sure you have reserves. Next slide. And I want to make sure I monitor the chat bar as best I can in case there are questions. You need to be disciplined when you invest in real estate. And discipline takes many, many forms. I'm sure I'll mention it more than once throughout the presentation. You want to stay on budget. So I guess let me ask this before I get too far. Are people, I assume everyone who's here is interested in investing or interested in representing investors and or is already investing and or is already representing investors. Is there anyone that would be outside of that category? If so, let me know. All right, I see nothing. I'm assuming as well that most of the investments that we're talking about are residential investments, whether it be single family homes, duplexes, triplexes, fourplexes, etc. Is anyone investing or looking at investing in let's say a larger apartment complex, 20 units, 30 units or more, or commercial properties? Chelsea is. All right. Anyone else? Okay. So I'm going to, I guess, focus more of my discussion on residential investments since Chelsea was the only one. I'm getting a few more responses. Well, you guys will have to tell me, but it looks like from the response I received, yes to commercial, okay. Well, we work in all property types, commercial, residential. I would tell you it's probably 50-50 in the representation we have. And commercial, all different property types, from light industrial to retail to office to large apartment complexes and small apartments, but every property type we are involved in. And what I mean by stay disciplined and stay on budget is when you buy a property, typically you're looking for some value added play, which is you're looking for some ability to increase the value, whether it be by making it nicer and making the property itself worth more, or making it nicer and increasing the rents, or leaving it as is but just running it more efficiently, or leaving it as is and increasing the rents because the rents are below market. There's always some effort to increase the value. That's typically what happens. Not always, but that's typically what an investor is looking for. And typically there's going to be some improvements made. And so you're going to want to make sure that you make a reliable budget in advance and spend real energy in determining those costs. And then stay on budget. Staying on budget is critical. Now there's certain things that are going to happen that push you off a budget. You can't do anything about it. You're going to open up a wall to fix something that's mechanical and find out that there's a whole much bigger problem that you see that you can't avoid. You're going to have to deal with it. But you're going to want to budget carefully and stay to that budget except for the unexpected. And the unexpected should be things that have to be fixed, not, well, I'd like it if the drywall look nicer. I'd like it if it was a new ceiling. If you didn't budget for it, you shouldn't be doing it as a general rule. Only things that should take you off budget are increases that were unforeseen, increases in material, increases in labor, or something that is important to the building itself. You see a structural issue, you see a mechanical issue. Otherwise, you stay on budget. You'll find that subcontractors charge more than you anticipate. So when you make a budget, you should talk to subcontractors. What do you charge per square foot for restoring hardwood floor? What do you charge, for this, that? Ask those questions to help get your budget more detailed and specific. Material prices always increase. And of course, I already mentioned that there are repairs that you haven't budgeted for that will become known to you that you will have to deal with. And spending over budget is one of the things that really can undo an investment. Investing in real estate is great, but it's not a get-rich-quick scheme. It's hard work. And you're generally not going to be able to buy a property where there's enough room in it for you to spend well beyond your budget and still make money. People that go over budget oftentimes have to sell their property, sometimes sell them at a loss or for no money, even though they've got all this effort and energy into it. So budget in advance before you buy and work very hard to stay on budget. Next slide. Advertised returns. And I see this with houses, but I see this a lot more with commercial. So somebody marketing the property, a real estate professional, will put out projected returns. They will say, well, this is a blank cap. First of all, capitalization rate. Are people familiar with what a capitalization rate is? Show of hands. Yes? Okay. So a capitalization rate is a subjective tool for measuring the risk/reward of an investment. And it's a calculation using the net operating income and then the risk associated with net operating income. The lower the capitalization rate or cap rate, the more secure the investment is considered. So, for example, the capitalization rate on a CVS or a Walgreens is generally very low because it is believed that the risk associated with investing in a Walgreens or a CVS is very low, that it's very unlikely that the store will close. The leases are 20 years. They're almost always backed by the company. They're not franchises. So they're company-backed leases, which means they're credit tenants, which means it's much easier to get loans on the property. And so you'll see a lower capitalization rate. You might see a 5 cap, a 5.5 cap, a 6 cap. Conversely, you might see an apartment building, a B apartment or a C apartment, which is a sort of a grading level for apartments that has to do with location and amenities and the age of the units, etc. Where a C apartment, an average apartment complex, you might see a capitalization rate of 10. Well, what that capitalization rate tells you is that the person who used the capitalization rate believes that the higher it is, the more risky the investment is. Where capitalization rate, because it's subjective, really comes into play is the appraiser. The appraiser determines what they believe the appropriate cap rate is. And they don't just determine it by themselves, but commercial appraisers talk and they'll use generally the same cap rates or within the same tight band of cap rates, depending on what the property is. Well, but going back to what I'm really getting at in the slide is that the fact that somebody says, oh, it's a 9 cap, for instance. Well, that generally, if you're marketing property, you're as aggressive as you can be. You're not going to lie, but you might take the most aggressive approach to increase the advertised price, to justify the advertised price. So you might call it a 9 cap. Well, the fact that you call it a 9 cap as the listing agent doesn't mean it's a 9 cap. And it's important because the market might view it as a 9.5 cap. Well, that's going to change the value. That changes the purchase price. In addition, you need to look at the net operating income by evaluating the operating versus expenses. And that net operating income you might not agree with. And so you have two factors that can dramatically change the value. One is that the net operating income is actually lower, which is going to make the value lower. And if the cap rate goes up, it's different than what's advertised, then that will also make the value go down. So the point is you really want to underwrite your own deals. So you want the numbers from the listing party, the listing agent, and then you want to do your own workup or analyzation or modeling of the property. And this goes down to single family homes. I think it's the exact same way. You want to make sure that you underwrite the home the way you want to write it. You evaluate the way you want to evaluate it and take that time. Don't just say, well, they say it's a so-and-so cap, or with a single family house, well, they say you can get this much rent. And you might say, well, it looks like you can in the area, except you find out your house only has 1.5 baths and the other homes in the area have 2 baths. Or your house has no garage and the other houses do have a garage. So you need to make sure that you take the steps to properly evaluate it on your own. Don't rely on marketing. And this goes with all the things that I have out there. Next slide. Identify what kind of investor you want to be. So there are what I refer to generally as 2 kinds of categories. There's the defensive investor, or that sometimes is referred to as the passive investor, where somebody else has an idea. I think we should buy this house. I think it'd make a great rental. If I put, $5,000 or $10,000 into it, I think we can get, $850 a month in rent. And you say, boy, that sounds good, except I don't really know the market. I can't fix anything up. I'm not even sure how to estimate it. I don't really want to participate. But I do like what you have to say, whoever you're talking to, a person with the idea. What about if I would be a passive investor or a defensive investor, meaning I'll put the money with you, but you do the work. And I just get a portion of the profits. That sort of passive investing, those opportunities exist in residential and commercial. Now, the flip side is, as you can imagine, if you don't have the expertise, you're not going to be offering any sweat equity or sweat labor, you're not doing anything, your return is going to be minimized to some degree. But remember, you're putting money in and getting a return. And so it's just like an investment, potentially like buying a stock or a bond. What type of investment or what type of return would you need to be satisfied? So you need to think about, is that the kind of investor you want to be? And there can be some lucrative investments. I do passive investing. I also do active investing. I have people that bring deals to me that I think are very intriguing, and I think the returns are great. And for my money to be passive, as far as I'm concerned, if I think I'm going to get a 9% return or better, and it's going to be in perpetuity. And that's one of the other differences is, there's a difference between I'm going to invest money with somebody and they're going to give me my money back in a year plus 9%. Well, that's not horrible, but that's not really great. I'm taking risk as to whether the person's going to pay me. I might be taking risk on what the house sells for. What if it doesn't sell for as much as we think it is? So that's not as appealing to me versus someone says, well, we're going to buy this rental home and we're going to rent it out for the next 20 years. And you're going to get 9% or more every year. Well, that's appealing to me. That really is exciting. So when I talk about percentages, it's all relative to the investment. Next slide, please. The enterprising investor. This is the investor, which I'm guessing the people that are in the audience are more geared towards, and that is, this is the active investor. This is the investor that's trying to find a deal. And when I say find a deal, find something to invest in and figure out how to maximize it, to fix it up and sell it, or to fix it up and rent it, or to raise the rents, or do something in a more efficient way to decrease cost, etc. That's the enterprising or the active investor. And that person stands to make a lot more money. They should make a much bigger return. And the return is, of course, cash flow, but it's also increase in value or appreciation. That doesn't mean they will necessarily get that. Not all investments are profitable. I have invested in things passively and actively that have turned out to be losses. It's not very fun, but it can happen. But the active investor is taking more risk. They're putting more into it. The risk being their time, their energy, which could be both in analyzing the deal and in improving the deal and dealing with the tenant and managing the property, etc. Signing an obligation, borrowing money and signing a loan. But that active investor, if things go as anticipated, which goes back to analyzing the deal properly and not being overly optimistic, then that active investor is going to receive a reward that is much greater than what a passive investor would, which of course only stands to reason. Next slide. Wealth growth strategy. So how do you intend to grow your money? You want to grow, of course, a small net worth into a much bigger net worth. And this goes back to what do you want to do? Nobody says investing in real estate, that doesn't sound like a good idea. I'm sure somebody said that before, but it's not something I hear. So the idea, I think, appeals to everyone, but how do you want to do it? What's the way you want to pursue it? And again, I think this goes back to discipline. So touching on discipline, what are you looking for? People say, well, I don't know, just a good deal. Well, that's great, except if you consider and are willing to consider any property type. Oh, I'll buy single family, duplex, triplex, quadplex, I'll buy apartment buildings. Okay, where? Anywhere in Southeast Michigan. You're going to spend, as an investor, in my mind, way too much energy. And without that focus, you're never going to get a comfort for a certain area or a certain property type by analyzing properties. And you're as a result, you're never going to find yourself really comfortable in should I buy this or shouldn't I buy this? I think you want to be targeted. I buy single family homes in Eastern Wayne County. I buy single family homes in Northern Detroit. I buy single family homes here. I buy or I only buy duplexes. I don't buy single family. I don't buy commercial. I only buy duplexes. I'll buy them in Tri-County area, but I only buy duplexes. So you start to get a level of comfort. In addition, you're going to want to have, what is your strategy? When anyone acquires property, you should have a strategy. What do I intend to do? Do I intend to fix it up? Do I intend to rent it out? Do I intend to raise rent from what it's already being rented out? Do I intend to fix it up and just sell it on the retail market? What do I intend to do? You must have an exit strategy when you buy real estate. So one exit strategy is fix and flip. The great thing about fixing and flipping is you are in and out. You are not taking a long time with the investment. So, if something happens, the market goes down, interest rates go up, unemployment goes up, things that can negatively impact value. If you're in and out, you could be impacted, but usually you're in and out for such a short period of time that when those bad things happen, hopefully either A, you're buying at that lower market because everything's been impacted and you can still make money, or B, you sit on the sidelines because you say, I'm just not comfortable with what's going on in the economy. So that's one of the big benefits of fixing and flipping. One of the other benefits is your money is not tied up for a long time. I'm sure you'll probably have to borrow money on a fix and flip, but you're borrowing it for 90 days, probably to 180 days on average, and you're out. And so being able to be in and out like that limits your liability. Is there any downside to fixing and flipping? Well, in general, no, but you know, I think, at least in my experience, and I think a lot of people that do this regularly, is it's not so easy to find a good deal. They're not everywhere. You got to work for them. And when you find one, well, do you really want to just sell it? I mean, yeah, you make some money, but then what do you do next? So, you know, fixing and flipping is great, but when you find a really good deal, you may not want to fix it and flip it. You might want to fix it and rent it. But it does allow you to sort of get the snowball effect where you make 10,000 on the first house and you reinvest in the second house. And now you got 20, and then the next one you've got 40, and so on until you work yourself up to a large amount of money that you have to use. You can do all cash plan. Someone says, well, I'm just going to go pure cash. And when you go pure cash, there is little risk to it because you own it. Now there's the risk that it doesn't rent for as much and the costs are more money. That's not as easy to find a tenant. Those things all exist. But when you're in it for your own cash, there's nothing really negative that happens about it. You don't have a bank saying, where's my payment? You don't get behind on taxes. You don't worry about insurance. Those things, because you're all cash. Of course, the downside is you haven't leveraged your money. And so, yes, it's your cash, but you might be getting a much lesser return than if you were to leverage it. Leverage meaning borrow some of the money instead of going all cash. So cash is a conservative way to go. There's nothing wrong with it, but you're going to limit your upside, but you're also limiting your downside. Debt snowball plan is borrow on a number of properties and then accelerate the debt by paying down one property at a time. So you would, you have 3 properties and you take the income that you make from the 3 rentals and you pay the mortgage on each property, and then whatever's left over you use, and you pay one house, you make an extra payment. And the idea is then you pay that house off, and then you pay the second house off and the third house off. Leverage is not a bad thing. In fact, in my mind, leverage is an absolute necessity. You want leverage. That's part of how you can get returns that make all this work worth it. But it's a balance. Like I talked about earlier, is you've got to have reserves. You've got to have the ability to pay debt service when you've obligated yourself. Because last thing you want to do is miss a payment and harm your credit, or miss a bunch of payments and lose your property. Next slide. Other strategies, the buy 3, sell 2, keep 1 plan. You buy 3 properties, you improve them all, you sell 2 of them to pay off and keep the 3rd. The trade up plan, which I kind of talked about, it's kind of like the snowball, which is you keep rolling your money, but you might be using, and you might use 1031 exchanges, which I don't know if we'll get in today in general, but I can tell you that a 1031 exchange, 1031 refers to the IRS code, and it specifically refers to as a like-kind exchange. And that's where you sell something and you have a profit when you sell it. And you take that profit and you reinvest it in a similar property. Like I sell a single family home and I buy a single family home, or I sell a quadplex and I buy a quadplex. And the benefit of a 1031 exchange is that it allows, when done properly, and there are steps to it, there are people that specialize in it, but when done properly, it allows the investor to avoid paying taxes on the gain when they sell property A to buy B. They take all the money from A and put it into B without paying taxes. Now, this doesn't mean that you'll never pay taxes, but you get to avoid or put off paying taxes. Well, that can be a big deal, because if I make $10,000 on a property and I was going to have to pay $3,000 in taxes, but I get to avoid that right now. I get to use the whole $10,000. Well, generally speaking, I would view that as having more buying power, because I thought I was only going to have 7. And whatever I return I need, let's say I want 10% of my money. Well, that's $700 a year. I have 7, that's what I was supposed to get. But now I have 10 because I did a 1031. Well, I'm investing 10. If I got a 7% return, that's the same as if I had paid taxes and only had the 7. So when I have the 10, my buying power, I'm willing to take probably a less of a return than somebody who brought $10,000 out of their own pocket. Why? Because I got 1031 money. So there's a distinct and tactical advantage to having 1031 money. And you snowball. You buy, fix up, rent, stabilize, sell. Take the profit, invest into the next property, and so on and so on. You can use self-directed IRAs. Oh, perfect. Whoever wrote that? Oh, I see who wrote that. Very timely. Yeah, 1031s are something that you're going to want to know about. It doesn't apply to every situation, but I think that in my experience, 1031s actually drive some of your decision making about when you're going to sell, would you sell, how long you've held the property so you can qualify for a 1031 exchange, etc. Sometimes the way it's set up in ownership will be impacted by 1031 exchange, because a 1031 exchange can have a significant benefit. It can't be understated how beneficial it can be. There's also use of self-directed IRAs, where you can use your IRA money to purchase investments. So when we talked about, well, you need, in my opinion at least, you need capital, or you need to be able to borrow capital. Well, you might be your own source of capital. You might have said, well, I don't really have any money, but I have this, $50,000 in this IRA that I got from my last job. Well, you can use your self-directed IRA. Now, when I say use it, there is a whole process to using it, because what you don't want to do is just take the money out. If you take the money out, there are penalties. Now, they've been suspended for COVID-19, but they'll go back into effect. There are penalties, prepayment or early withdrawal penalties in the amount of 10%, plus you have to pay taxes on the money unless it's a Roth. So when you use IRA money, you want to consult with somebody about how to do it. What happens is you hire a trustee. They act like a fiduciary. The money goes from the IRA, wherever it's currently being held, to the fiduciary. The important part is that you, as the individual, never take possession of that money, because you don't want to undo the tax preferred and tax qualified status of that retirement money. The money goes into the investment. Whatever happens with the investment happens. It gets sold, or it makes money, etc. And that money goes to the fiduciary, so that you never actually take possession of it as the owner of the IRA. Even if the investment's over, you don't ever take possession, and that way you do not undo the tax qualified status of that IRA. Next slide. And this is regarding if you have an existing real estate portfolio. You might want to pay off the debt to decrease your overall debt levels. And these are factors, trying to determine how, what's your risk tolerance. And I think that's really an important thing that you need to establish early on. If you reduce it where you don't owe any more or leverage any more than 33% of the property, then you're going to reduce risk, and you're going to increase the income that you get. Now, when I say increase income, not necessarily the percentage return, which usually is the driving factor, but the actual dollars in your hand is going to be greater. Why? Well, because you're going to have a smaller bank loan. Why? Because you've paid down the leverage that you have. Another strategy is selling low equity properties and replacing them with better ones. Again, could be in conjunction with a 1031. Usually you see sort of a progression with investors. They kind of get their foot in the door, they learn their lessons, they get a taste for it, they really like it, and they sort of want to move up the chain. Whether moving up the chain is moving on to a nicer single family home, or moving on to multiple single family homes, or starting to move into multifamily, maybe a duplex or a triplex or quadplex, or even moving into commercial properties, both residentially based, like a small apartment building, or maybe it's an office building or a retail building or a light industrial building. And this might be part of that strategy. Also, be diligent about any loan obligations you have. You always want to get the best financing. Part of the return, part of the value of a property is based on the leverage that you get. You know, if you're able to borrow money at 5% and the rest of the crowd borrows at 6%, you have an advantage. You're going to get a better return. And so you want to be diligent about that. If you've got existing loans on investment properties, you're going to want to periodically check to see if you've got the best rates. Is it worth refinancing, etc. Next slide. This is if you don't have any existing properties. You don't have a portfolio. You're just getting started out. You might buy more passive assets like we talked about, like higher quality residential properties. And passive could be, and I should have mentioned this, it could be as simple as you buying a house and then hire a property management company. I know there's one participating with us right now, and having, turn over everything to that person. And that can be a great way to do things. You don't have to know what market rent is. You don't have to know about the eviction process. You don't have to monitor necessarily when the properties need fixing or get that call late at night where the person says, I have a leak. You can hire a property management company to do that. So that can be a great way to be an investor. Make money. You're not going to make as much, but of course you shouldn't make as much as the active investor. Why? Because you're being passive. Was there a question? Another possibility is to be a lender. Make short-term loans. I talked about fixing and flipping, and people will get short-term loans for that. Maybe you want to be a lender for that. It helps with liquidity. You can get a nice rate of return on your money. It doesn't necessarily, it's not building for anything, it's not long-term, but that's a way to sort of dip your toe into real estate. Let's go to the next slide. Picking a property. And I think this goes with discipline, which I've kind of already mentioned. You're gonna get good at investing when you understand what you're looking at and trying to determine, is this something I should buy? And that to me is about discipline. It's about discipline, whether it's the property type again, or where you buy, or both. I've seen investors that will literally say, I buy in the city of Detroit on the east side, I buy between this street and this street. I only buy brick bungalows, and they must have at least 3 bedrooms, and they can't be on a crawl or a slab, and they have to have a garage. And really strict criteria. And they might look at, people will send them 50 homes, they'll look online for hours, and they might only see 2 or 3 that qualify for what they want. And maybe they get lucky to make a deal on one. But they understand exactly what they're buying. People shouldn't be saying yes to every deal they see. They shouldn't be saying yes to 50% of the deals they see. The amount or the percent of conversion or the percent of deals you buy versus what you're shown, it should be a relatively small percent. Every once in a while you get lucky, but in general, it should be a small percent. If you're being careful and diligent, that's what you should find out. You should evaluate big picture criteria. And I'll give you a little story. I talked to an investor, I think it was 2 weeks ago, from Seattle, Washington. And he is investing in Kalamazoo. And I said, oh, do you have a connection? He said, not at all. He said, I'm an analytics guy. That's what I do for work. And I've been researching, and I've looked at the analytics of Kalamazoo. And that's where I want to be. I want single family homes in Kalamazoo. I said, have you ever been there? He said, once. That was it. And he ticked off all these reasons that he liked about it. It was a college town. He thought the economy was good. Numerous factors. And that is really, when you look at an area, what do you like about an area? What is it that, from a big picture standpoint, that gives you confidence in the area? And confidence doesn't mean, oh, I'm going to where the strongest economy is. In fact, if you go there, I bet it'll be really hard to find a property to invest in that you can make any money. There's a reason why people come to Michigan. We have a good economy, but it's not the best in the United States.
So I talked to the sprinkler guy.
They call you?
No,
Huh?
he texted me back. I said, "Well, why are you calling?"
That's a question. Our economy, though, is solid, and there are properties that are at reasonable prices, and that's why people come to Michigan. In fact, you might find yourself bidding on properties against people from out of state, out of country, different continents. So you're not looking for the strongest economy. You're looking for factors that make sense to you. And some of it is, I know the area. I have confidence because, it doesn't, again, it might not be the strongest area, but I know this area. And that'll give you confidence. And then you want to evaluate some of the, the small scale things or criteria. The convenience, how easy is it to, having a rental property that's 4 miles away versus 40 miles away is a huge difference. 40 miles away might be a lot better place, but how much effort are you going to spend going there, back and forth, looking over things, collecting rent, meeting with the tenant, etc., versus one that's 4 miles away? The romance of it, meaning really what's appealing about it? Why do you like it, and why do you think someone else will like it? And I'm assuming, and this applies to fix and flip or tenanted properties. So spend time and energy understanding why you like a particular area. And it could be because it's affordable. Oh, I did get a question from Kelly Dix. Kelly, I don't know if I don't think I have that in this presentation, but I'm going to do it because you asked. So I'm going to go off script just for a moment here. Kelly asked, and I'm going to read her exact question, is, are you going to speak on how to hold a property in a business name or any liability? And I'm going to answer that question. So when a property is owned in an individual's name, if something were to happen, and I'm going to pick an extreme example, God forbid this ever happens, but there's a cracked heat exchanger, leads, allows carbon dioxide to enter the home, and that can kill people. Something catastrophic happens. Well, if that happens and I own the property in my own name, they're going to sue me. I've got insurance, but it's possible you can eclipse the insurance policy. In certain catastrophic instances, it does eclipse the insurance policy. And so now they come after me. Well, when they come after me, they come after everything I own. Now, I don't own a ton of things, but I've acquired some things. I've got rental properties. It was hard, a lot of hard work to get those. I do not want to lose those properties. If the rental properties are in my name, I take on that extra risk. So what you'll find is that most investors will put, and when I say put, deed their investment property into an entity. An entity like an S Corp, S standing for subchapter S or small business, which is part of the Internal Revenue Code, or a limited liability company. An S Corp or a limited liability company are the two traditional methods by which an investment property will be held. And when it is held by an S Corp or an LLC, that corporation or that corporate entity actually owns the property. Now, someone could say, well, wait a minute, Rick, I don't want to do that. I want to own the property. Well, you as an individual don't own the property anymore. However, you own the shares in the S Corp or the membership interest in the LLC. And so you control exactly what the entity does. But now if we go back to my example, somebody got hurt, really hurt at the rental property, and they now sue. Well, they don't sue me because I'm not the owner. They sue the LLC or the S Corp. And the worst thing that can happen as the owner is that you lose that investment property. Now that would hurt. That would hurt a lot. And I'm not saying this is a common occurrence, but if it happened even once to me in my life, it would hurt. And the point is, it would hurt to lose that investment property. But that is the limitation on liability. There is no way to get to anything else I own, with one exception. If I have acted with gross negligence or gross misconduct, for instance, we'll go to the cracked heat exchanger. I knew all about it. I brought a contractor in. The contractor said, well, Rick, that's going to cost $1,000. And I said, $1,000. I mean, I'm going on vacation this summer. I don't really want to spend the money. Let's talk in the fall. That's gross negligence. That's the kind of thing that they could come after you personally, which is called piercing the corporate veil. But unless your actions arise to that level, that LLC or S Corp will protect you against liability for your personal home or other rental homes or other assets you have or interest in a business or anything you have. It will be an absolute shield against anybody making a claim to those other assets. Now, when you have an entity like this, you're going to have a tax return. So you're going to pay more money to have your taxes done, probably in the order of $350 to $500 a year for that tax return. The tax implications aren't any greater. Both an S Corp and an LLC have what's called pass-through income, meaning if the LLC makes $10,000, it just goes on your personal return like you made $10,000 more. So there's no double taxation of any kind, but you have the tax return, and you're going to have a bank account. Oh, someone just cued me in. Yes, you're going to have a bank account that is separate and distinct. You're going to want that separate bank account because when you have an entity own the property, you're going to run all the accounting through that particular entity. You can use QuickBooks, whatever system you want, but you're going to want, rent comes in, you book it and deposit in the account for the entity. When a bill is paid, you're going to want to pay it from the account, from that bank account. If you had multiple properties, I get the question, well, if I have multiple properties, should I have separate LLCs? I'll just use LLCs, make it a little easier, although S Corp there's no difference in my opinion. Should I have 4 LLCs for my 4 properties? Should I have 1 LLC for my 4 properties? There is no right or wrong answer. What's important to know is that the amount of risk that you take. So if you have an LLC for each property, 4 properties, 4 LLCs, well, you've effectively put up sort of firewalls, if you will, between each of the properties. So if something happens with property number 2, it doesn't affect property 1, 3, and 4, or you personally. No effect. And so that's a distinct advantage. The negative is you're going to have 4 bank accounts and you're going to file 4 tax returns. Is that enough of a negative to stop you from having separate LLCs for each property? I'll tell you, I use a separate LLC for every property. That's me. That doesn't make me right. That doesn't make someone who puts all 4 in one wrong. But of course, if you put all 4 in one and something happens, then that will go back to the tenant who is, seriously injured. When they sue that LLC, they can go after all 4 properties because the LLC owns all 4 properties. So it's a balancing test. I think one way that I see a lot of people look at it is how much equity is in the property. So if you own 4 $100,000 homes, each one's worth 100, but each of them has a lien or a loan against them for 70,000. So each has $30,000 of equity. Well, I've seen people say, well, look, Rick, I don't want to lose any money. But you said this is unlikely to happen. And I'd say, yeah, it's unlikely. But I still want to protect myself. Even if it's unlikely, I don't want to take too many chances. So what I'm going to do, Rick, is I'm going to put 2 houses in each LLC. That's what I've determined is the balance I'm comfortable with. That way I only have to pay 2 tax returns. Now on the downside, I have risked $60,000 of equity because each house has 30. But you said it's not very likely, and that would hurt. That hurt a lot, but that's what I'm comfortable doing. That's a fine evaluation Because remember, you're really evaluating based on equity. It's not what the property's worth. It's what's the net equity position. I think that's the way you want to evaluate it. Again, I still would do each one a separate LLC. Even in that example of $70,000 loan, I just like to have it nice and clean. I also like it that way because if I ever take on an investor partner, which I take on from time to time, I want a clean standalone LLC. Also, don't use an LLC used before. So if I buy a piece of property with an LLC, I then sell it, and I say, well, I got this LLC, and I had to pay, $60 to create it, and I had to pay, $150 to have the operating agreement done, and I'm going to use that again. I really think that's a bad idea. Why? Because now you buy the second investment property with the same LLC, and the first LLC, the person who, not the first LLC, excuse me, the first property, the person that bought says, hey, Rick, I think you didn't disclose that the foundation was failing. I'm like, foundation was failing? I had no idea. And they say, yeah, I think you did, Rick. Well, based on what? Because I think you did, Rick, and I'm going to sue you. So I'm suing the LLC. Well, that LLC owns my second investment property I just bought after I sold my first one. Whereas, we'll use the exact same example, except when I sold the first investment property, I just let that LLC terminate, and I started a new LLC. Now the person who bought the first property comes back to me and says, Rick, foundation, blah, 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 I'm going to sue you. And I say, okay. They sue an LLC that has nothing, zero. So I really am a big fan of not reusing the LLC. Yes, it costs a little bit of money, but I think the value that comes along with having a fresh LLC every time is well worth that cost. There was a question I saw come up. From Kelly, what else would you need? A business plan, etc. Well, Kelly, do you want to unmute yourself so I can make sure I'm answering the question that you're asking?
Yeah, you did talk about an operating plan too, but I guess I don't know much about LLCs. So I'm just wondering what else do you need besides a bank account? Is it simple to have an LLC or complex?
So having an LLC is relatively simple. It really is, the accounting is the same as if you owned it in your own name. The tax return, takes a little bit of effort, or you can have your CPA or tax preparer do it. But other than that, the fact that you've got an LLC, to me, doesn't create any more work beyond what we've already talked about, which I think is really nominal. I really don't see an LLC as creating more work. Having a business plan, to me, that's not necessarily based upon an LLC. That's based upon how you're going to pursue investing in real estate, whether you do it in your own name or in an entity. The business plan is about what am I going to do? What am I going after? How much money am I going to spend? Where am I going to get my money? Just like any business plan. And I think a business plan is a great idea. I really do. And being disciplined, you want to have a plan. And you might alter the plan. Being disciplined doesn't mean, well, this is what I think I'm going to do. So no matter what, this is what I'm going to keep doing, even though I don't think it's the best way to do it. No, business plans get amended, they get altered, but that doesn't mean you're not being disciplined. You're still following your plan as amended. So a business plan, I think, is part and parcel of being disciplined and determining how you're going to get involved in real estate investing. But it's not necessary for having an LLC or an entity. That is simply done for liability. The business plan value is to hopefully lead to success for you by considering all the aspects in advance, and then being disciplined when you're actually executing.
Well, I think it'll help you too with an investor, right? You'd have to have one to get maybe investments.
I'm sorry, Kelly, you're coming in a little muffled. What was that?
You would probably need one if you need to get an investor as well too, don't you? Probably a business plan to show. So
whenever I look at an investment, I do a spreadsheet. It's a house. Okay, what do I think it's going to cost me? How much money do I think I'm going to have to invest? What are the taxes going to be when they uncap for me? What's my insurance going to be as a non-owner occupant? What's the yard maintenance going to be? What do I think I'm going to have to spend in repairs each year? How much do I think I'm going to have to put away in a capital reserve? What do I think the market rent's going to be? How much am I going to pay a realtor to find that tenant for me? You know, a vacancy factor, a bad debt factor, all these numbers I put in, which are the same things that the banks do and the appraisers do.
Right.
And I'm doing that for myself. And then if I want to take on an investor, or I need to take on an investor, which is usually how it is, I'm going to show that investor that spreadsheet, which is, here's how I've analyzed this deal. And here's the returns I think we get going forward. So as you can see, investor in year one, I think we're going to make 8.3%. And in year two, I think we're going to make 8.9%. In year three, 9.7%. And I'm showing that my expense is going up slightly, maybe my insurance going up slightly more, the principal coming down, so I'm creating, you know, more equity. But you're right, you're going to, what I call it a pro forma. People use other terms of modeling, etc., analysis. It's all the same, which is, it's you taking the things that you know are fixed. So if you're going to pay action, that's a fixed number. Taxes, you know what the taxes are going to be. You know, well, you can find out what the insurance can be. And then estimating what are these other costs are going to be. What's market rent, all these things. And Kelly's exactly right. You're going to have to show that to an investor. If I'm an investor and you say, well, I just think this makes a lot of sense because, you know, this is a really good area and people are going to really like it. Those could all be true statements. They don't tell me one thing about the investment. Nothing. Tell me how old the roof is, when you think it's going to have to be replaced. You know, tell me about the windows. Tell me about the strength of the school system. Tell me about on-site parking. Tell me about what you did, the rental study you did. Tell me all these things that make all those sort of generic statements come to life, you know, that they're supported. And there are things you're going to do that are estimates. I mean, market rent is an estimate. It's a well-founded estimate, but you don't know exactly what you're going to rent for. You might get lucky and find someone that loves the place and pay more. You might find you're renting in November, December, and people aren't that interested. I mean, you know, there are going to be things in a pro forma that are not exact. But when you show an investor, you want to show them something that you believe in, that you can defend. You know, a good investor will ask you questions. Well, why do you think that you can get $800 a month for this house? It looks like the market says it's more like $750. Well, yes, but after I redo the hardwood floors and we redo the roof and I paint it and I put some flowers outside, you know, it will be better than the other houses. Or, you know, I'm going to clean up the basement to make it usable, not for living in, not for sleeping, but usable for storage or a TV room, or I'm going to, you know, whatever it is, just defend it. You know, be able to defend it, because investors want that. They want to know that you really thought about it. They realize nothing is a guarantee. But if I were an investor, and I am, I expect someone to show me something that they can defend. And defend doesn't mean I'm right. That's why. It means, well, here's why I think I can get more money. Here's the assumption. And then I get to hear it as an investor, and I might say, I don't agree with that, or yeah, you know what, I think that's a reasonable assumption you made there as to why we could get more money. So you're going to want a pro forma. Typically, you're going to want a narrative. Now, when people first start investing, usually they go to their parents, their siblings, their children, their best friends. You know, it's a tight network. And those are the people that you're asking. You still want to justify it. You still want to treat it like it's any other investment. I think or any other investor. And it's a way to practice, but I mean, who would you want to disappoint more? Some random investor you don't know, or your parents or your family? I mean, that hurts. So not every investment works, but to me, if I'm going to ask my family for money, which I have in the past, or my friends, which I have in the past, and even going forward, I want to be able to look them in the eye and say, I believe in this. I'm putting money in it. I'm going to sign the note, and ask me any question you want. In fact, I'd welcome you to ask me questions, because I want to explain to you so you know what I'm thinking and why I think this is the case, because it's not a guarantee. I strongly believe in it, or I wouldn't have brought it to you. But you need to ask, because there are projections here. these are estimates. I think they're well thought out estimates. I think they're realistic projections, but ask me so you can understand and make your own decision, potential investor. So I think that's an important thing to do.
Thank
All
you.
right, back to my regularly scheduled presentation. And I want to end by 2:30, so I'm gonna, let's see. Financing, next slide. I'm gonna focus on private lenders, seller financing, and hard money loans. And private lenders really are oftentimes, hard money lenders are oftentimes one and the same, although I sometimes think private investors you might find are friends and family that'll loan you money. And the only difference between a private lender and a hard money lender is a private lender, if it's friends and family, they're going to give you a more reasonable rate. So let's start with hard money lenders because I think that's probably the most common thing you'll run into. Hard money lenders are typically want 12% of their money. And if anything, that might be going up. So it's expensive money. Typically a hard money lender you would only use for either a flip. So you're borrowing the money for, 4 to 8 months, 6 to 12 months max. And the reason why you want it to be a short period of time is you'll get eaten up by the interest rate. You might have picked a great property. There might be equity there, but it will disappear fast. And so hard money is almost used exclusively for fix and flip. The only other time that you would use it is for stabilization. So you buy a fourplex that can't be occupied. You borrow hard money to get it so it can be occupied. You lease it up, and then you refinance. You don't sell. I mean, you might, but you want to keep it. So this is great. You refinance with a traditional loan. The point is, hard money should only be used max 12 months. If you have a pro forma that says, well, I need hard money for 2 years, and it's a real hard money lender, not your dad or your brother loaning you at a more friends and family rate, but 12%, you should not be borrowing that money, in my opinion, for any more than 12 months. It will eat up all the value you've created or all the value you found when you bought it. Maybe not all of it, but much of it will be consumed. So hard money loans, there's nothing wrong with them, but just understand they're situational. They're not long-term financing. In a hard money loan, you're typically going to find yourself talk about, yep, Emery, I'll talk about that in 1 second. With a hard money loan, you're typically going to be paying a point, maybe 2 points up front. That is a percentage point of the money you borrow. So in addition to the 12%, you're going to pay 1% or 2%. So you're borrowing 50, you're going to pay 500, maybe 1,000. And you're also going to pay for the document preparation for legal documents like a promissory note, a mortgage, probably should be a business affidavit, etc. So you're going to pay for those. So it's expensive. But if you don't have the ability to get credit, you might need that kind of loan. As far as leverage goes, a hard money lender might loan you 100% of the money you need. Now, I want to be clear about this. If they loan you 100% of the money you need, it's not because the property is only worth the 100%. The property's got to be worth more. Hard money lenders are making asset loans, based loans, meaning that they're loaning a percentage of what they think the asset's worth. It really doesn't generally have anything to do with the debtor, the borrower. So credit isn't always a big issue because the lender is saying, well, if the debtor doesn't pay, then I'm going to take the property back. So they might be loaning, 55 to 60% of what they think the property's worth, which means, of course, as the orchestrator borrower, you better have bought your property right. Anne-Marie brought up, there's an 11% cap. And the cap applies to residential properties for which the borrower is buying for themselves. So as their principal residence or as a secondary residence. I'm assuming as an investor, you are not buying it for your own use. In fact, that's why I brought up the business purpose affidavit. And that's an affidavit that most lenders will make a borrower sign that says, I am borrowing this money for a business investment and that I will not be occupying this home at any time, nor will I ever occupy this home. Now, That doesn't mean the investor couldn't occupy the home, but the investor is making a representation in the form of an affidavit that it's true, they're not buying it for their own residence and they will never occupy it. And that's the reason why that is done, is because hard money lenders don't want to run afoul of what Anne Marie just mentioned, which is the 11% cap. The 11% cap applies, again, for a buyer. So you as the investor, you're buying it to live in. Hard money loan lenders only loan to people that are buying it to fix and flip. They're never, the borrower is never going to live there. It's a business deal. It's no different than if the borrower was going to buy a Coney Island or a light industrial building or an office building. It doesn't matter. And there isn't a cap, or at least I should say there isn't an 11% cap on that loan. Anne Marie, did you have any follow up on that?
Sorry, Rick. No, I just wanted to make sure that people understood what the difference was.
Perfect. That was a great question, by the way. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Private lenders, I already made the statement. This is friends and family. Maybe they'll loan you money at 7%. They say to themselves, well, a bank only pays me 1%, and I just got this money for whatever reason. I sold something or I got something, and hey, I'll loan it to you. I mean, 6 or 7% sounds great. If you can get that money, that's fantastic. If you are the borrower investor, if you're the borrower, I would still make it formal. I think that just makes people feel better, and I think it's the right thing to do. So there should be a promissory note, there should be a mortgage, and you make payments regularly, interest only, or maybe you don't pay till the end, whatever it is, but put formality to it. And the reason I say that is because I think it makes that person that much more comfortable the next time around, and you don't have that situation where the person says, well, mom or dad said I could borrow it, and I'm going to pay them, and I know it's taking a little longer than 12 months, but they said they didn't need the money. And then all of a sudden mom and dad are irritated because they didn't need the money, but they expected it. They thought you said 12 months or less. 12 months has come and passed and they didn't get their money. So I think you want to be formal about it. You want to be disciplined about it. And I think that's the way to get mom, dad, or whoever to loan you that money again for the next deal. Seller financing typically will take, is it challenging to find banks who will refinance the homes in an LLC versus individual name? So that's a very good question. There are banks that might not be as receptive to loaning money if the property is owned in an LLC. And this really only applies to residential property, like a single family home. Banks don't have any issue when it comes to commercial. But residential, banks that will loan residential might. And you might find that you have to transfer it out of the LLC, get the loan, and then transfer it back into the name of the LLC. That's a pain in the butt, but I've seen that have to happen. But there are lenders out there that will loan to the LLC. Now, the reason why that question was asked, or at least the reason why banks care, is many banks that loan on single family homes, they're used to having a direct agreement with the borrower. In the LLC, they're not comfortable with. Why? It makes no sense. Banks loan to LLCs all the time in commercial, all the time. In fact, basically everyone that borrows commercial has an LLC or an S corp. I can't tell you what the hang up is or the issue is when it comes to single family homes, but there are lenders, that's just the way they do it. A lender that understands it's a rental home should be willing to loan the money to the LLC, and they'll make the actual member of the LLC sign a personal guarantee, meaning if the loan doesn't get paid by the LLC, the bank can come after the individual on the personal guarantee. That's what should be done, which means you don't have to take your property out of the LLC. But I do still see banks having these requirements. I would go to a bank that understands investing, and I know some, and there are many more that I'm sure could be added to a list, who understand and appreciate that and won't make that an issue. Because I do think it's really important to own in the LLC. Yes, you can take it out of the LLC, get the loan, and put it back in the LLC, but I find that to be cumbersome and not necessary if you find the right bank. Seller financing. Typically, you're going to find that in the form of a land contract. In a land contract, the seller is really holding the paper. You as a buyer have what's called equitable title, which is the ability to occupy the property, to lease the property, basically all the bundle of rights in equitable title. The seller is called the vendor. The buyer is called the vendee. The vendor retains legal title. Legal title is really analogous to a bank that loans you money. Legal title just means you're entitled to get a stream of cash. That's what you get as the vendor, unless the vendee breaches. So they don't make a payment. They don't pay the taxes. They don't pay the insurance. They let the house fall into disrepair. Any one of those instances would be a breach, just like it would be a breach in a mortgage. And that allows the vendor to pursue getting the home back, just like in a mortgage. There are two ways a vendor can get a home back. Through forfeiture, that's done through the district court. It's a faster, cheaper method. There are some negatives to it. Or the vendor can do a foreclosure, but it's a judicial foreclosure. No foreclosure by advertisement is available to a vendor on a land contract. If we're doing the back and forth comparison between the vendor having legal title and the bank being a mortgagee, the banks can do foreclosure by advertisement, pretty darn similar to forfeiture, or they can do a judicial foreclosure, which a land contract vendor can also do. When there's seller financing, you want to make sure that everything is documented, including payments. Don't pay in cash, or if you do, get a receipt. And make sure that your documents are very detailed, just so that the parties understand what they've agreed to. A land contract will typically have a balloon payment. Now again, a balloon is permissible as long as the person buying it is not buying it for their principal residence or secondary residence. If the buyer is buying it for their principal residence or secondary residence, then Dodd-Frank applies, in which case there can't be a balloon. The only exception is if the seller is selling their principal residence. So I know I kind of jumped around a little bit. To be clear, pardon me, a balloon is acceptable unless the buyer is buying as their principal residence or secondary residence, which wouldn't be an investor, by the way, because investors are buying other properties, not where they're going to live in, but where they're going to rent it or fix and flip it up, etc. But it doesn't apply if it's if it's an investor. But if the person's going to live there, Dodd-Frank applies. Can't have a balloon unless the seller is selling the principal residence, in which case then a balloon is permissible. Next slide. Skip this one. Skip the next one. Skip the next one. Skip the next one. We'll skip all this. Skip to page 23. One more. 23. Yes, tax implications. When you sell properties, there's going to be tax implications, whether it be short-term gains or long-term gains, and that depends on how long you've had the property. So be aware of that. If you're trying to do a quick fix and flip, then you just understand there'd be short-term gains and they're treated differently for tax purposes than long-term gains. But if you're getting close to where you have a property for enough time to avoid short-term gains and get long-term gains, be cognizant of that when you're selling property. Going a little quicker because I know that we are getting to the end. Let's see. How about slide 25? Oh, you got different numbers. About one more slide. Aha, there it is. All right, taxation of rental income. You will have to pay taxes on the income. You must declare it on your tax return. But you'll have expenses you can deduct. from it that you've incurred. Also, typically, the first monies you receive are not taxable because it goes against your basis, what you've actually invested in the property. But remember, it's not just, oh, look, I'm going to get $150 of every rent payment. No, that's your gain. You're going to pay taxes on the $150. Let's see. Next page was my LLC entity talk, which we've already had. Let's go to the next page, which is my 27. Aha, perfect. So the seller's disclosure statement. When you're buying properties, the fact that the person never lived in the home, whether they fixed and flipped it or it was a rental, does not eliminate the seller's obligation to fill out the seller disclosure statement. Make sure the seller disclosure statement's filled out. Make sure it's filled out thoroughly, because that's the baseline. Also, thoroughly inspect it with a professional inspector. If you have that skill set, great. But otherwise, make sure it's filled out. Now, you say, well, Rick, the person said they wrote a big line through it and put never lived there, and they refused to fill it out. And so what am I supposed to do now, Rick? Don't buy the home. Or buy it with being on guard. But the act requires sellers to do it. There's no criminal penalty if they don't. If they say, you can't make me. Well, that's true, you can't make me. But if somebody was unwilling to fill it out, to me, I'd be very, very suspicious. I mean, it just doesn't make any sense, because let's go to what the Seller Disclosure Act is. It's a requirement to answer certain questions truthfully. There's no duty to investigate. So I don't have to go in my attic. I don't have to hire an inspector. I don't have to hire a contractor. I don't do anything. I don't have to lift a finger. I just have to tell you the truth as the buyer. Well, why would I write, I never lived there? Why wouldn't I just tell the truth? I might not know. Hey, I didn't live there. I haven't lived there in 2 years. I don't know. Well, first of all, it's not as though you're going to know nothing as a seller, even if you didn't live there, because you had a tenant or you've been working on and fixing up. You know something, but you might not know everything. But why, as a seller, would you be so reluctant to tell the truth? Because that's all it is. It's the truth. It doesn't, the fact that I say there's never been water in the basement, as long as that's true, I don't know that. That doesn't mean there's never been water in the basement. It probably should mean that, but just to be clear, it's what do I know, not what the actual truth is. Because remember, there are things that are going on with every house that the owners don't know. They're just living there, or they're just renting out. They don't inspect every, inch of the attic or the foundation or the crawl. Nobody does that. So it doesn't make sense why someone wouldn't fill it out. And so when someone won't fill it out, that tells me I'm going to be buying a problem. I don't know how I'm going to get comfortable with that house. So I just pass on it. If you do buy, make sure that it's completely filled out. If somebody writes, and I'll use some classic examples I've seen, question that says, there ever been evidence of water in the basement or crawl? And the answer was some. Well, some could mean 12 inches of standing water, or it could mean there was a damp spot in the northwest corner. Those are far different issues. But some doesn't tell me that. In fact, if somebody said, hey, Rick, I'm going to lie. I want to commit fraud on the seller disclosure statement, but I don't want to be sued, or at least sued successfully. I want to be able to get out of it. What should I do? Well, first of all, I would tell you shouldn't do that. But if I was being honest, I'd say, well, the person that under discloses. So for instance, there was 12 inches of water in the basement. I would write occasional, where it says, has there ever been evidence of water? Occasional. What does occasional mean? I don't actually know what occasional means in that context. But I can tell you this. If I were a buyer, I then have the 12 inches of water, it's going to be hard to prove fraud. So my point being that when you read those answers and you look over that seller disclosure statement, pay close attention. When somebody says, I have no idea if there's ever been water in the basement and I've owned the property for 6 years, that doesn't make any sense. I don't care if it's been a rental the whole time. Because tenants will say, hey, landlord, there's water in the basement. You don't have to live there to know that. That's very, very suspicious to me. So pay very, very close attention to that. Foreclosed properties, great way to get properties. but understand that the bank is not going to make representations to you. Sometimes mechanicals aren't going to be on. It's buyer beware. Banks don't set out to lie. I'm not going to say I've never run into it, but they're not trying to lie. What they're saying is we're making no representations. And by the way, the bank doesn't have to fill out the seller disclosure statement. So you don't get that comfort that you do when you get with a regular seller. But it can be a great source of buying property. Also issues if you bought at the tax sale. You can't get in the property, so it's a bigger risk, but there can be upside. So you have to factor that risk into how much you're willing to pay. Let's see. Well, actually, we're at the time limit. So I would say, first of all, thank you, everyone. Feel free to call me with questions, whether it's about investments you're looking at or your clients are looking at. I'm happy to answer questions. I do charge people. I'm not free all the time, but I tell people when I'm going to charge them, and I tell them what I would charge them. You know, you want me to review this? I charge this much. You know, there's something that you want me to write, I charge this much. Usually it's flat fees, but for litigation, it's hourly. But I tell people, and of course you can say, no, thank you. So, like I said, I'm happy to answer questions. Feel free to call me. It's my duty to tell you if I'm charging you. So with that, I appreciate everyone, and thank you for attending.
Harry, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Okay. Will you be able to make the